up, Misfits? Welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. My name is Chris, and together we are going on a journey. Misfits, one of my favorite quotes is from Nelson Mandela. He said that education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. Now, he said that in 2003, and ironically, in 2022, it seems like more people know about him from the Mandela effect. It's a little funny to me that while humans have created entire civilizations, established fascinating new schools of thought, and amassed amazing feats in science and technology, we still use an education system in America that was designed in the early 1800s by Horace Mann to create better factory workers. Even today, we spend nearly 8% of our tax money on the education system, and a growing number of parents prefer to homeschool their children rather than send them to public school. I feel like that should raise more eyebrows than it appears to be raising. Now, is the system terrible? By all means, no. But is it antiquated and is it designed to create free thinkers? Also, no. To complicate things even further, political agendas and personal identities have created an environment where the average student must navigate personal identity choices that seem to undermine any actual knowledge that's being gained. And it shows. One of the top television shows over the last few decades was Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And there were very few winners on that show. So, what if you're a concerned parent who wants to teach their children positive moral values, financial literacy, and being a leader in their community? Well, my guest tonight believes that he has the answer to that. Connor Boyack is the creator of the Tuttle Twins series of books, a children's book series that teaches children positive moral values in fun and character-driven stories. He's also the founder of the Libertas Institute, and he's worked to help establish laws in his home state of Utah. I sat down with him to discuss what made him want to write these books in the first place, the vast amount of uncontested government seat positions in America, and what we should do when our elected officials don't have much knowledge of the issues that they're enacting these laws upon. It's time to talk about our personal liberties, Misfits. Please welcome Connor Boyack.
Playing the Misfit Heroes podcast.
Connor, welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. I have been waiting to speak with you for so long. I'm very excited about it. You are a perfect example of how one should affect change in their community. I really love what you're doing. You know, you see a need, you come up with a solution, and then you go out and you address it. And I love that about you. So welcome to the show. How are you doing this afternoon?
Appreciate being here. Thanks for having me. I'm great. I'll maybe we'll start this way. I always like to confess that I'm a drug addict, and my drug of choice is dopamine. What I do impacts so many people that like every day I'm getting emails and texts and tweets and all the rest of people like, hey, you helped here. This is great. So like, I just feel very blessed to do what I do because it's helping a lot of people. And being able to see that your impact, I think anyone wants that, right? You want to know that you're making a difference and you're helping other people. And so I feel really fortunate to be in this line of work and just, have platforms like yours and others to kind of spread the word and share what we're up to. It's just a lot of fun. So thanks.
Yeah, no worries, man. You had me worried there in the first half of that sentence. I'm not going to lie, but
I'm not a bishop. I can't take your confession.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it looks like you're making some big changes around the country, not just, in Utah as well. But before we get into what you're doing, let's talk about you a little bit. Can you describe your how you grew up and, you're also a believer as well. I mean, can you explain your testimony a little bit?
Sure. So I grew up in San Diego. I was an exile of California, but before it was cool and trendy to do, which is very common now. So I spent my whole youth in California and was raised in a Republican conservative household. My mom was on the city council for like 10 years. She would speak at BYU Education Week and wrote some books. And so she was kind of the activist, not activist in the traditional sense, but active. She was very active in trying to do things and make a difference. And so I grew up seeing that and kind of got wired into my DNA a little bit, I guess. Not initially, I was a firstborn of four boys. I was kind of a slacker. I was in a ska band. I hated school. I cheated, I was lazy and adrift. Didn't really have purpose or see much meaning in, school and all that kind of stuff. So went off to BYU, went on a mission, to Honduras. And it wasn't until after I graduated from college where I finally discovered, passion, curiosity for learning certain things like American history and political science and economics. And what really bridged it for me, talking to your question about the testimony, was during my college years, my grandparents lived here in Springville in Utah. And so I would spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house, and my grandpa would share a lot of talks with me, from like Ezra Taft Benson and David O. McKay and some of these guys. And he'd take me to different events. And I'd started to get from him a lot of understanding about, the Constitution and American history and liberty and all these things. And it really put a foundation below what my parents, frankly, my mom had exposed me to, but I didn't really have a foundation back then. Well, my grandpa comes in and gives me this foundation, connecting it to like the war in heaven and agency and, understanding like all these things and secret combinations even and all this stuff. And I started to become very passionate about understanding like not only the issues themselves, but recognizing that I had an opportunity to do something about it. And that, I was starting to discover God's path for me and the journey that I needed to go on, which I'm now firmly on. And, and just felt so grateful that I could find that path and resonate with it where I can then be of similar service to others and now share what I've learned and talk about my faith and help people understand why faith, frankly, is so important. And despite all the detractors and the naysayers and things like that, just the importance of like my faith is actually primarily intellectual. I'm a very cerebral person. I'm not a more emotional testimony type of. I don't knock that, but that's just not me. I've had experiences and I've had all those things that further my testimony, but I'm someone who likes studying a lot and researching. And I just feel like the gospel of Christ is a very sound doctrine. There's clearly questions and all kinds of tangents we could go on, but I just love the richness of the gospel. I love the impact it has on my life, my kids' lives. It's something that I want to share with the world. And my particular flavor is kind of the gospel of liberty and that kind of, agency and that side of it. But it's just something that animates me, and I'm grateful to have that in my life.
Well, it's really it really comes through in what you're doing with your life. I discovered you through the Tuttle Twins book series, and I mean, it's really interesting. There's two sides of that. You've got these children's stories that are entertaining, but then you've also got the principles that you're actually instilling through the stories as well. So tell us about the Tuttle Twins. What made you want to start writing this series of children's books?
So, I run a think tank, Libertas Institute, and I'm running a nonprofit as my day job. But then I would come home and I would want my kids to understand what the heck Dad did all day for work. So I found myself one day going on Amazon trying to find books that would teach my kids, about free markets or property rights or the Constitution or freedom. And there was nothing. I mean, they have books on potty training and the birds and the bees and like every topic under the sun, there was a kid's book for, but not these types of issues. So I was talking with a buddy of mine, Elijah Stanfield, who's also a member of the LDS Church. And we had met at Freedom Fest. And we had always been kind of talking, hey, he had like read my blog. I think that's how we first connected. He was reading my blog back in the day, and then we met in person, and we were both on kind of the same wavelength. We could recognize that, we should find a way to work together. So then we started talking about this kid's book idea, and we just did a book. It was just, we wanted both of us wanted this to exist for our kids, and it was just a fun little project. So we made it available for sale, but then people started buying it, and then they said, when's the next one coming out? We're like, all right, we'll do another one. And it was kind of this market demand that drove it in the early days to say that there was like a hunger and appetite for this type of material because there was nothing like it. And so that to us was a bit of a market signal that like, hey, we're on to something. And so we just decided to keep going. In the early years, I always envisioned doing like an 8 to 10 book boxed set, and that would be like, here's the Tuttle Twins series. And then we'd be done. And when we got to book 8, I sent a survey out to our list, and I said, hey guys, I've always had this idea. What do you think? Should we cap it at like book 9 or 10, create a nice little box, gift for the grandkids for Christmas, whatever. And 86% of our community, when given the option between that or more books and just keeping it going, 86% said, are you kidding me? Keep on going. So now we
Yeah.
got books for toddlers and teens and a cartoon and a podcast and all kinds of stuff. And so we've really recognized that we've tapped into something that a lot of other families need and want. And so now it's just a huge part of what we do to continually be creating more content to serve families out there.
Well, I checked out the cartoon on YouTube actually, and I was pleasantly surprised, when you're discussing something like, your personal freedoms or economics and things like that with younger children. I could see where it would be simple for them to just zone out, phase out, but it's actually entertaining. I mean, for me as an adult, I was kind of chuckling a little bit at some of the things that were going on there. It's really a novel idea. So how did the cartoon series come to pass? Was it just sort of a natural progression from the books?
We had been wanting to do a cartoon for a couple of years, but couldn't really figure out how to make it work. And then Angel Studios comes along and releases The Chosen, which is a multi-season series about Jesus, and it's done extremely well. And everyone I talk to knows about it, and most people have watched it and loved it. So it's blown up. It's really successful. And one of the Harmon brothers was on the board of my nonprofit. And I know the Harmon brothers from like a decade past. We've collaborated on various projects, Bitcoin and Liberty projects and various things. And so we started talking, because they were then like, all right, what's our next show? We got The Chosen, but then what? And we're going to start adding other shows into this Angel Studios platform. So we started talking, and they're all like-minded. Their kids all read the Tuttle Twins books. When we told them we want to do a cartoon, they're like, we want to do a cartoon. And it really clicked really easily. The fact that, they knew the brand, they loved the ideas, they have the competency to help pull it off. And so we teamed up with the Harmon brothers and launched the cartoon. We raised, I think, almost $5 million from like thousands of people in our community to help fund the production. And it's gone really well. I'm super pleased with how the cartoon's turned out. It's just a fun, different format for people to learn these ideas too. And part of my vision is creating this content empire where, we got books and curriculum and a podcast and a game and a cartoon. And I just want to create like all kinds of things. So no matter how kids like to learn, we've got something for them. And so the cartoon kind of plugs into that ecosystem that way.
Well, I mean, that's definitely something that needs to be done. One of the things that I find very interesting about the topics and issues that are in the books is it's not stuff that's taught in schools, really, and it should be. I mean, I look back as a almost 40-year-old man now, and I can tell you the Pythagorean theorem. I can't tell you how to properly do my taxes.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, can you give us some of the examples of some of the things that the books talk about for somebody that isn't familiar with the book series?
Sure. Yeah, we've got topics like the Golden Rule and the non-aggression principle. Inflation and central banking, how money works and why prices keep going up, how free markets work and how it's really just people collaborating and serving one another, individual rights and justice. We've got central planning versus individual planning. We've got a book all about entrepreneurship, the destructiveness of socialism. We have a book about market incentives and how the government can mess up a market by creating a lot of problems that change people's decisions. We've got a book, our most recent book that we put out is all about how when people get scared, they ask the government to step in and save them. And so the government just grows and grows and grows with every crisis because we're constantly surrendering our freedoms because we're afraid. So we've got we got 12 children's books. We've got a bunch of books for toddlers. We got a bunch of books for teens. Fundamentally, we're trying to teach political and economic ideas that demonstrate how the world works so that these young kids, as they get older, have a foundational understanding. I got an email recently from a dad. He's walking down the grocery store chip aisle with his 9-year-old daughter. And he turns around and she's no longer next to him. He looks back. She's, back by the potato chips. He walks back over to her. Honey, why'd you stop? And she's staring at these chips. She turns to her dad and she says, Dad, I now understand spontaneous order. And the dad is like, what? and she's like, this is why there's like 15 kinds of potato chips. There's no president of potato chips. There's no one dictating whether we should have sour cream and onion versus, ruffled versus whatever. This is just the market. If people want it, we're going to have it. And it's spontaneous order, which is one of the terms we introduced in one of our storybooks. And the dad is just like his mind is just blown. Like, my 9-year-old understands more than most congressmen do about economics.
Right.
And so that's the beauty of telling teaching these ideas through story, through fun, relatable ways. It sticks with kids. I've just been blown away at how well kids are learning these even complex ideas, but it's presented to them in a relatable, fun way. And these little aha light bulb moments happen a lot. It's just fun to see. And that's where the drugs come in. That dopamine every day, parents are telling me these stories and I'm like, yeah, awesome. And it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's like a modern day kids say the darndest things, right?
Totally.
Yeah. It's really interesting. The fact that you saw the need to write these books really speaks to what's going on in our education system and what kids are learning in schools. And, every story that I seem to hear in the news about some issue with, you always see these videos of like parents going to their PTA meetings and demanding their educators, teach differently or teach certain things. They recently had this bill that had nothing to do with in Florida, this bill that they're calling the Don't Say Gay bill, which was really just talking about sexual issues with kids under third grade, but it's like politicized.
Right.
With all these political ideals in schools nowadays, do you think children are being taught, how to get a job and go live a life, or how to live a happy and prosperous sort of free life?
They're absolutely not. I spoke to a parents group recently, and some of the moms were complaining to me. They said, the school system is broken. And they were all kind of harping on this theme. And I had to respectfully disagree. I said, I think that's actually completely untrue. I don't think the school system is broken at all. I think it's doing exactly what its creators intended for it to do. The problem is most people don't understand the architects of the modern Prussian-based public schooling system that we have. And therefore, they don't understand what the intent was and what they were trying to do. When you go look at Horace Mann and John Dewey and these guys like John Goodlad and others, what you realize is that they were all secular humanist socialists who wanted to suppress individuality and create conformity through collectivism. And what I mean by that is they were very inspired by the Prussian model, which was this militaristic manner of education to inculcate obedience and subservience to create good members of the military. Or the American version became good factory workers through the industrial process, where bosses just wanted people who could sit at a line and do what they were told. And so this schooling system became very conducive to that, very successful in training people to follow orders and comply and learn what they were told, when they were told, in the way that they were told. It's a great way to create cogs in a machine and, mindless robots. It's a horrible way to raise entrepreneurs and, free and independent people. But that was fine with Horace Mann and Dewey and others because they were not supporters of freedom and individualism and entrepreneurship, quite the opposite. So no, I don't think the school system is broken, despite many good teachers who don't sign up knowing any of this. They sign up to just teach kids, and yet they plug themselves into a system that has a certain design. And so they hit their heads against the wall, and many good teachers quit because they find that they don't make a lot of progress. So no, I don't think the school system is raising entrepreneurs and helping these kids in any way. If anything, I think it's dumbing them down into mediocrity. And I think that's a massive problem for those of us who want to make the world better, that we have this just morass of citizenry that's apathetic and ignorant and completely comfortable with all of that. And I think the school system bears a heavy blame for that outcome.
I listened to an episode where you were on another podcast and you were mentioning how the sort of idea that you saw in your own children's schools sort of helped mold the Tuttle Twins a little bit as well. There was a story about going into your school and seeing like the ABCs and how they had I think J is for social justice or something like that. I mean, yes, some of these issues are addressed, but why do you think that children in particular, why do you think the school systems are sort of focusing on the politicization and the sort of really brainwashing of these children? And I mean, can you also tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, no, this is here in Utah. It was not my kids' school because we've homeschooled our kids their whole life. This was a nearby elementary school. The PTA president put up the ABCs being helpful, and the school had them displayed for a while. And every letter has, A, and then another page has B, and then C. And below that, they have the words that you can learn, except this wasn't apple and banana and cookie. It was A is for activism, and Y is for yes, we can, which was Barack Obama's slogan, and all these things. So it was a very politically lefty kind of oriented thing. And, maybe this PTA president thought she was being cute or I don't know what, but it's like, that's not what, public school is all about, to be teaching these ideas.
Right.
I feel like ultimately the public school profession, like many government agencies, because it is a government school system, attracts a certain type of people and repels a certain type of people. The entrepreneur-minded people who care about freedom and individuality often quit. John Taylor Gatto is perhaps an anomaly. He was a 30-year public school teacher in New York in the 70s and 80s, and he was so good he was awarded the New York City Teacher of the Year by the establishment, the PTA and the teachers unions and all that. And then I think it was the following year he won New York State Teacher of the Year. But he was a kind of a very reform-minded teacher. He hated systems and hated the top-down control and conformity. He was always trying to encourage his kids, like, what do you want to learn? And let's help you. And let's get out of the classroom and, go see the world on a, field trip and just experience life. And he did things really differently. He got so frustrated after 30 years that he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled, "I Quit, I Think," in which he goes on to explain that, in his own words, he said, "I'm hurting kids more than I'm helping them," because he was doing it within a system that required them to get permission to go pee, as just one example. Yeah. And so he quits. He goes on a public speaking tour, writes books, and starts talking about the problems he's been fighting against. Good teachers often quit. And so what is left are people who like conformity, who like the rules and the regimentation, who like the control of other individuals. And that is not a good outcome in terms of putting our children there and expecting that they're going to learn individuality and freedom and entrepreneurship and all the rest. The profession no longer really attracts and retains the right type of people who can teach those things. In a religious context, there's this quote from an evangelical pastor where he says, and I'll get this mostly right, he says, "Can Christians really be surprised when they send their children to Caesar's schools and then they return home as Romans?"
Yeah.
And so, for those of us with certain values, religious values, political, economic values, whatever, are we really shocked if we're telling the government, here, propagandize my kids for 12 years, and I'm sure they'll turn out to understand all the dangers of government and the ways that, it is trampled on our, like, no, of course not. It's going to sanitize and scrub history and teach them that government is great and can solve all your problems. And that's not what I want for my kids. So we've never sent them there.
Well, I remember, I think it was when I was roughly in high school or just finishing high school, the concept of No Child Left Behind sort of came about. And, it brought in this massive focus on spending in education. Yep. And nowadays, in Googling, I found we spend nearly 8% of our gross domestic product on education. Wow. Who is creating this curriculum and where do you think that money is going? And also, as an author who sort of teaches these ideals, have you all been able to sort of get your books into the school systems, and has there been any difficulty with that?
So, there's some big publishers who produce most of the textbooks and things like that, and they'll oftentimes they cater to California as one of the largest markets. And so what does the California school system want? Okay, and then now we're going to take that book and we're going to sell it all across the country. So you get you're in Ohio or Texas or Florida or whatever, and your kids are learning what California wants kids to learn, which is, I think, again, often opposite of what a lot of parents want. So there's big companies out there producing this stuff. There's authors trying to inject the books with all their, anti-racism and trans and 1619 Project and all kinds of stuff. And certainly there are teachers who, beyond the textbooks that they're using, will introduce these ideas on their own. And then they'll just go, riff. We made the news here in Lehi, Utah at the beginning of this school year because I think it was a history teacher, went on this huge rant about Trump and was attacking anyone. If your parents voted for Trump, they're stupid, or any, like all this kind of stuff. And there was a student recording the whole thing, and it went viral, and the teacher got fired. But there's teachers like that who will just use their platform, and they perceive it as a platform to push the ideas that they believe in, rather than cultivate ideas, out of the kids' minds and this kind of Socratic method or whatever. To your question about whether we've gotten into the schools at Tuttle Twins, I'd say yes, informally and organically. If there's schools or teachers or whatever who want this stuff, we definitely provide it on the cheap and give them resources and help support them. There's many private schools who integrate Tuttle Twins into their official, curriculum and the like. It hasn't been a large part of our outreach effort, though, and the reason is that I've found it historic, and we've tried. We've done various programs to really push. For example, we have a whole economic curriculum to teach free market economics for kids. And that one we were push, and very lackluster results, in large part because it is very hard to get kids to understand things and apply them to their lives that they spend 30 minutes learning in class, and then they go on with the rest of their day. This was one of John Taylor Gatto, that New York teacher's, one of his biggest complaints is that the public school system sows chaos in children's minds because it regiments all their learning into little increments and deprives them of an opportunity to go deep and really immerse themselves in a subject, because you send them home with homework and then they're similarly regimented and their mind is so frazzled, and it creates mental chaos by depriving the child of depth. And that was one of his criticisms of how schooling is structured. And so for us with the Tuttle Twins, I want depth. I want substance. I want kids to understand these ideas and think about them, and maybe go read a Wikipedia page or pull up a YouTube video to learn more, or, whatever. And when we went into the schools, again, it's hard, the structure. It's like, okay, how do you teach these little bite-sized ideas? And then when the kid goes home and mom says, "What did you learn today?" And the kid says, "I don't know." Now mom or dad lack any context for what the kid is learning, so they can't support and ask questions and discuss. So now there's no reinforcement, there's no retention of the ideas. And so it's in one ear, out the other. And sure, we could look good to our donors and supporters and say, we taught this many students, but like, I'm in here to change the world, not just check a box and say that we taught students that ultimately didn't care and didn't really learn anything. So we focus on at-home learning, on family learning, on mom and dad reading with their kids. Mom and dad understand these ideas. They're talking about it. Oftentimes mom and dad are learning these ideas for the first time themselves because they never learned in school. And so now retention goes through the roof, and conversations are happening. And a 9-year-old in a grocery store staring at potato chips can talk to her dad about economics when otherwise that would never happen. So we're focused on supporting the family. People say these are children's books, and yes, they are, but fundamentally we see these as family resources for the whole family of kids of all ages to learn together.
Yeah, it really shows that deep dive that you're talking about. I mean, how many times have you been watching like a late night talk show like Jimmy Kimmel or Conan O'Brien or something like that? And, you see one of these segments where they're asking college students just the most basic of questions. I watched one the other day, and this girl, the guy was literally asking who we got our liberty from, who we had the Revolutionary War against, and she was like, Europe. I was like, whoa. But I mean, let's switch gears a little bit. You're also the founder of the Libertas Institute. When did you sort of decide to go into that? When did that come on your plate?
So that was 2011 when I formed Libertas. After a few years of bouncing around other organizations, trying to find where my home was and what I should do, and never really found the right fit. And it was interesting. My political involvement actually started because of polygamy in the FLDS. I moved to Lehigh, was newly married, and this was, I think, 2007, if I'm remembering right, when they had the raid on Warren Jeffs' compound in Texas. And they went in and they took like 400 kids away from their moms, placed them in foster care, which at the time, and probably still, Texas's foster care system has all kinds of issues, and drug abuse and sexual abuse and all this kind of stuff. So they basically legally kidnap all these kids, put them into other strangers' homes, and they go in, and sure, they found stupid, horrible things that Warren was up to, and we all know that story. But what for me was deeply unsettling was the fact that I felt that their due process rights were just disregarded. Their privacy was disregarded. This horrible event was the result of a false tip. So it was legally problematic. And I just felt like separating the kids from their families was horrible. So I started like an online petition. I didn't know what I was doing. I started talking to people and speaking out. I got on the news. It's my first time for a news interview. Like it just started growing. And I was like, you know what? And so then all these people, again, the drugs, they started thanking me. Thanks for standing up. Yeah, I know it's, I had like polygamous people, like no one will speak up for us. I'm so grateful that, because who wants to like stand up for like weirdo, polygamist was the kind of the idea, right? So no one did. And so I got a lot of thanks and people, and what did I do? I did a petition, big deal, and was talking about it on the news. But the fact that no one else was standing up for those people and that I was, to them, was like all the difference in the world. And I found myself like, oh, like I really like doing that. I like standing up for the little guy. And it's not to excuse what Warren Jeffs was doing or anything of the like. It's just to say that we have a process for things and we have protections of individual rights for a reason. And just because there's a bad dude doesn't mean we can disregard all their rights. And so that was like the seed that planted for me, where I wanted to figure out a way to get involved in like the policy world, dealing with like laws and criminal justice and really helping people. So I thought, like, is that law school? Is that, whatever? And ultimately decided that I wanted to start my own organization, kind of a think tank where we could change laws and really make sure that policy was adequately protecting people's rights. So we started in Utah. Now we work across the country. And it's just been a total blast.
Well, that's a really interesting, first case,
Yes.
so to speak, but I honestly, I find it very interesting. A lot of people focus on organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, and that, a lot of their things they've been focused on has been sort of this anti-racism movement and everything like that. But a lot of people forget that the first case that the ACLU ever had was defending the Nazis' right to hold a protest in America. And yeah, that's kind of an ugly sort of, I don't agree with it, but I do agree with our First Amendment right to be able to, believe whatever you want to believe and say whatever you want to say. It's free speech. That actually kind of segues a little bit into something else I wanted to talk about. I've been listening to your podcast a lot, the Sunday Musings podcast. You speak about a lot of diverse topics, and from a viewpoint that I don't think gets, brought up very often. I listened to, for example, your podcast about the LDS Church and their involvement in politics, and it was very eye-opening. You mentioned this concept of home teachers and their involvement in using the church community to sort of sway people. A lot of people have put out their thoughts about how they think the church should stay away from politics. What are your thoughts on that as a whole? I mean, and if there's anything that you can or cannot say, don't even worry about
it. So there are people who oppose church involvement in politics and say, oh, we should tax the church, because they're speaking out. And the reality is, like any nonprofit, like any individual, has the right to engage on political issues, including churches. And I don't think they should have to surrender their tax exemption just because they want to get involved. I think churches should speak more broadly than our own church. I think churches should speak out far more. When you look at the early America and all the pulpit pounding and Bible thumping and pastors standing up and, on both sides of the issues, there were pastors saying, no, Romans 13, we need to submit to the government. The king has been divinely appointed by God. Stop your rebellion and treasonous activities. There were plenty of pastors, advocating for that position. They all kind of got buried after, the revolution. Like people didn't want it. So there was a great book that came out a few years ago that resurfaced a lot of these pastors and preachers who towed the line from a very kind of conventional Romans 13 biblical standpoint, but they were, on the losing side. And so history sent them down the memory hole. Certainly there were pastors on the other side who talked about, God's birthright of liberty and all the rest to support revolution. Frankly, I'd love to see more of that. I mean, my personal preference, I'd love to see, moral agents taking the moral high ground, speaking out, more often on the issues of our day. Whatever it is, I mean, take abortion and the Roe v. Wade thing. The LDS Church My church, all they really did publicly was revise their handbook statement to basically say that as states are evaluating this issue, members may appropriately, engage in the political process. Like, where's the fire and damnation of God talking about like this? So I went back. I had a whole I did a podcast episode on abortion, and I went back and I looked at all the general conference addresses to find how often abortion was being referred to, and it's been like radio silence in the past decade or two. Hardly any mention. There was a bunch during the 70s, during Roe v. Wade, and all that was there, and now. So it's like I think there needs to be more engagement. I think I would love to see more teach people correct principles and let them govern themselves. And that's an important distinction. Do I think the church ought to be telling people how to vote? No. Do I think the church ought to be emailing members of the church like they did with our Prop 2 medical cannabis effort in Utah and saying, vote against this thing? Like, no, I don't think the church should be getting down to that level, because that's where you get, I think, political corruption and intrigue and bureaucracy and mortal men and women, trying to do like that. To me is beneath what the church, in my opinion, ought to be doing. But I think teaching correct principles, like Joseph said, and letting them govern themselves is the ideal. And I would love to see more of that and less of, the church sending its lobbyists, to go meet with legislators and say, here's what we want, or here's what we don't want. Now, in fairness, take something like water. The church in Utah uses a ton of water. They have all these buildings, they have all this land, they have farmland all over the place. Like, so any organization of that size that owns a lot of property is a stakeholder on issues pertaining to property or water or whatever. So in that case, sure, maybe they're just defending their interests, or they're making sure that, the investments of the church are defended and what, like, that makes sense. But in terms of like imposing views on others, or saying, hey, we want Utah's alcohol laws to stay the way they are, and, you have to, buy something to eat. You can't just order a drink, or you can't have like happy hour. Like, it's just all these weird things. And the church is like, no, that has to stay this way. It's like, really? Like, do we really need to be bossing people around like this and using church resources to push for policies in a certain way? I think that's, and from my vantage point, that's beneath the church's lofty and important mission to be getting into the minutia of that. I think it should just be, here's the principles. We trust you guys to go, work it out and govern yourselves. But I think problems arise when the church starts to try and dictate that governance and get involved in that process, from my experience.
I want to take it back to one of the things we were talking about earlier. I want to take it back to Libertas a little bit. One of the things that I am very interested in is your work on protecting our rights to privacy and data. Not a lot of people, I think it would be easy to focus on these big ticket items like abortion or medical marijuana or any of these stuff, but not a lot of people understand all of that. And it's something that I think is coming very big for us as Americans in the future. It appears many of our legislators, they seem less than knowledgeable about technology and the sort of social implications and things like that like big data corporations, for example, obtain through the use of our data. Why do you think that these issues, they're not more heavily addressed? And what sort of policies and procedures do you think can create safer online interactions for citizens versus in real life interactions? Do you think it's like blockchain or decentralization, or what exactly do you guys support with that?
Okay, that's a fun question. I'm gonna be tangential just for a moment to opine that in my lexicon and my vocabulary, I don't use the word citizen.
Okay.
I think that defines us in relation to the state.
That's a good point.
And I believe that we are free and independent individuals. So I like the word individual or people or whatever. So I'm not saying that against your question or whatever. I just more am offering that up of like, because I found over time I would say, oh yeah, citizens, have these rights. And I'm like, well, we're not citizens. Government comes later. We were here first. We as people exist free and independent of the state. We delegate our authority to the government to wield on our behalf. I'm not a citizen. I'm an individual. Why do I think that legislators are not, better focused and understanding? And, in a lot of ways, gosh, what's the right way to answer this? I don't know that the incentives are aligned appropriately to ensure that we have so-called statesmen and really wise and principled people. The political process is a race to the bottom, and Who becomes our leaders, so-called? People who their only claim to power is winning a popularity contest.
Yeah.
and barely at that. It's not even a popularity contest. It's getting a majority vote of those who voted rather than a majority of, all voters. And it's just, I don't think the incentives are there for like like people are always asking me to run for office. I'm never running for office, man. I know what it takes, and I know what it's involved, and I know how awful it is, and I know that you have to sit in committee meetings, talking about stuff that I have no interest in, and you got to deal with constituents yelling at you, and like, so I never see myself running for office, and I think the right people who should be in office to protect our rights the right way often are the least likely to ever run. So again, like the teaching profession, attracting perhaps the wrong people who like controlling or propagandizing or whatever, I feel like the political process also attracts the wrong people. It attracts the power hungry people, the people who like to, boss other people around or have their way. So I don't know. It's tough. And obviously there's exceptions to that. There's some wonderful elected officials that I've worked with. And even though we stridently disagree on some issues, they're amazing on others, and total exceptions to that rule. I don't want to be too general, but it is a challenge to attract the right type of people to run for office. And then when they win, make sure the incentives are in place for them to be committed to fighting for a policy rather than, the Senate president says this, or, I'm going to lose election if that happens, or, it becomes very difficult to get them to like stand firm on principle and really fight for something because there's so many competing pressures. As for blockchain and decentralization, like I'm a big advocate for that type of technology. I think it is very empowering. I think it is the way of the future. For example, I don't think any of us are going to need cars very much in the future. I'm going to be able to say, hey, I need a car just like with Uber, I can get a driver to come pick me up. I'm going to get a self-driving car to come pick me up and take me to where I need. And we can get rid of parking lots and, all that. Like there's just a wild future ahead of us that empowers individuals with this on-demand type of service. Now, the trade-off to that is, there's a great economic opportunity there for increased efficiency and cost savings and all that. The downside is, what was that Will Smith movie, iRobot, or I can't remember, but like who controls all the cars, right? When they're all like self-driving, can Elon Musk be like, Connor, we're going to drive you off a cliff, or the government's going to like track where I'm going. So there's total trade-offs. And the challenge is that's where we're going. I mean, the technology is there. We're going to have robots. We're going to have AI, we're going to have all these things. The question is, can that be done in like the safest way possible that protects our rights? Do we have the right structures and incentives and regulations or whatever in place so that things don't go off the deep end? Because like it or not, I mean, you've seen those creepy robot dogs that, I can't remember the name of the company, but Boston Tech or something, something.
Boston Dynamics.
Yeah. Like it's happening. There are people out there creating this tech, pushing us towards this future. Bitcoin is out there. It's never going away. Now you got central banks wanting central bank digital currencies where they can control and see what everyone spends. And so there are bad players out there who want to use this technology to control and co-opt us. I think it's all the more reason why the virtuous players need to step forward and make sure that we're building systems that, are kind of shielded from some of those problematic players and what they're trying to do. Because in a sense, the technological progress, I feel like, is inevitable and it's going to happen. So it's a question of how, not when, not if, how it's going to happen. And so things like privacy, I think, are critical. So few people are talking about it. You look at Edward Snowden and he's trapped in Russia, and you look at Julian Assange and he's, been renditioned, and it's tough. The people who are doing the best to actually try and advocate for privacy and show the abuses of the government, clearly the government is fighting back, and it makes me worried some days. But I'm also optimistic and hopeful that. I don't know, that someday there will be a wake-up call enough to jar the American public from their deep slumber and get them to push for something different. I question every day if that's going to happen, and if so, how bad it has to get before it happens. But I still have hope, and that's in part what I'm trying to do, is kind of wake people up, give them the red pill, and help them see the problems before it's too late.
Well, it's so funny that you just mentioned you weren't going to run for Congress, because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, oh, I could totally see him running for office. That's so funny. With that being said, I was recently reading that there are like hundreds of seats in local and state elections that go uncontested every election cycle. I read on your website that you guys sort of have a little bit of interest in that. I mean, do you want to see more sort of regular people running for office?
Well, I mean, it's the incentive still. It's running against an incumbent is very hard, and unless you can raise a lot of money, or that incumbent did something horrible that you can beat him up, for in the public, it's just very hard. So it becomes a deterrent for other people to run, unless there is an open seat, or the incumbent did something horrible, or you're a millionaire and you can self-fund a campaign to really try and push them, because the apathetic public just is like, oh, that's the incumbent. Okay, well, I haven't heard of any scandals, so I'll just vote for him, because who's this other guy and how do I know? And you know how it is, perhaps at least, like, I get every election period, I get like dozens of calls and texts from neighbors and friends who are like, hey, who should I vote for? Like, you can't even take the time to like look into this yourself. Right. You claim that you're like, you love freedom and you launch your fireworks and have your 4th of July barbecues, but you can't even take like 10 minutes and look into this. Now, granted, I'll tell them who to vote for, because I'm like, I'd rather you vote for the right person rather than go vote for the wrong person. But it's the incentives, man. And it's all screwed up and skewed. And so, like, I don't know that there's virtue in just having more people run for office. If anything, it's just having more alert people who make sure we get the right people in office. Sometimes the incumbent is great, and I don't want their challenger. So I would rather their challenger not run, so that incumbent didn't have to be distracted with an election, and they could continue working with us to go pass good laws and try and solve the problem. So it's all very circumstantial. And some people I definitely would love to see run again or run at all. Some people I'm like, I don't want you to. So I don't know. I'm not one to just have this general rule that say every election should be contested and we should keep those people honest and make that, like, sure, maybe, but I don't know. I just don't see it producing a lot of different outcomes in terms of policy. It's more just the game that you have to play to get the power. The question is, what happens when you get the power? And plenty of people will play a game and put on a face, and then they go vote totally different. So it's, I don't know, no easy answers.
Well, you've had all this success in writing books. You've helped enact some laws. You've helped work with legislation, and you're really just out there helping your community. If you had one piece of advice for someone to try and change the community around them, what would that be?
Be anxiously engaged in a good cause, bringing to pass much righteousness. Don't be a slothful servant. I don't know what your path is, what others' paths are. Everyone's on their journey, different talents, different time, all that stuff. So I'm not going to say with any specificity, run for office, write a book, host a book club, hold a town hall with your elected official, write a bill, like start an organization. Who knows, right? No one had the idea to tell me to start a think tank or write children's books. I'm on my own journey. But I think what is critical is recognizing that, as Ether 8 says, we have to awaken to a sense of our awful situation. There are a lot of bad things going on. We can't pretend all is well in Zion. We got to pull the scales back from our eyes. We got to open our eyes and realize what's going on. And then once we do, let's not be a slothful servant waiting to be commanded to be told what to do. Let's figure out something of our own. What are our talents? What can we do? Start small. For me, I started an online petition about polygamy because their kids were taken from them. Like, big whoop. Didn't ultimately change anything, but it was the first action that set me on a path to where I am today. And, with small and simple things, great things are brought to pass. So start small. Don't wait to be commanded. Be anxiously engaged. Pick your issue. Just start and have motion, and good things will come of it.
Well, Connor, this has been a lot of fun, and you're a really interesting cat to talk to. Where can people find out more about you? Where do you want people to go to find out what you're doing?
So Tuttle Twins, you can just go to TuttleTwins.com. Libertas Institute, you can go to libertas.org. I've got a simple little landing page at ConnorBoyack.com. But as you point out, what I think a lot of people are glomming onto recently is the Sunday Musings podcast, which you can find where all your favorite podcasts are. It's just a little Facebook Live that I record every Sunday where I pontificate on what's on my mind for that day. And hasn't got me in any trouble yet being the key word, but I'm having fun and so I would love for more people to listen.
Well, I wish you best in the future. I want to be a good steward of your time. We're sort of winding down towards the end of the episode. Every episode, I ask all of my guests the same question, and it's one question, 2 parts. What was the last goal that you completed, and what's the next goal that you want to set for yourself?
Pull out of the back pocket of my jeans my document where I have all of this written down. So this one's actually really easy for me. So my last goal that I completed was last week we published our new Tuttle Twins American History book. It's a 240-page book all about American history, and it's the first in what will be a 4-volume series. Been working on it for 2 years, just launched it last week. That's at TuttleTwins.com. So that was a big goal that I could cross off and check off the list. Remind me the second question. What's the next goal I'm working on?
Yes, sir.
So running a nonprofit, it's all about fundraising. I'm trying to raise $5 million this year. We're, doing a lot of new initiatives to teach kids entrepreneurship, and certainly our Tuttle Twins work and changing these laws. And so a large part of what I do is partnering with people of means to be able to invest in our work and grow what we're trying to do and show the impact we've had and what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'm trying to help grow our team by raising more funds. And so that's one of a long list of goals I got on here, but yeah, that's it.
Well, Connor, I wish you all the best in the future. I know that big things are coming for you and your organization, and I just love what you've been doing. I think what you do is just great, and what you are explaining to people when they need to learn it and they're not being taught it is just fantastic. Kudos to you, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks again.
Well, Misfits, we did it. That's our episode. I want to thank you so much for listening, and thanks again to our sponsors. If you want to support any of the sponsors of this podcast, there are affiliate links on the sponsors tab of our website over at www.misfit-heroes.com. You can also find links to all of our social media there, so be sure to follow us for immediate up-to-date info about the podcast. Please, if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to help me out, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button down below so you're notified of new episodes as they're released, and make sure to leave a rating or review of the show on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Truly, Misfits, I love you. Thank you so much for listening. And until the next episode, be kind, love one another, and be a hero.